9.7, which is the RV parks campground, which is the standards for review, which might be a better place to capture some of these, given the concerns I heard. But yeah, has the commissioner, that's one question, have you guys looked over the standards versus the conditional and permitted uses?
I have not.
Okay.
So, but I had a conversation with you, and I'm curious, I'm open to this potential change, but I would like to know, is there other options? Because there is a variety of opinions on this, and I would like, before we make a decision, that we see, what is the spectrum?
Sure.
So I would like a menu, a buffet rather, and then the board will choose from the buffet of options.
So I guess what's the intent behind removing the conditional use? From what I understand, the concern was mostly on the density that's allowed inside like a RV park campground on a given property. And then the impact that density would have as far as like light pollution and noise and all, to the neighboring properties. Or is it that we don't want RVs and campgrounds in any rural ag forest areas?
Which is where they typically are.
When this was drafted, from what I understand, they reviewed many other RV campground codes from other counties, and that's kind of where they derived it from. I don't know if there's any specific data other than reviewing other county codes or how it was reviewed or how it was drafted, so.
Well, I can understand, and I think part of it might be there's a confusion between RV parks versus campgrounds. So potentially, say you're looking at ag forest, so much of the places I had gone camping as a kid was in the forest, the same place that I have taken my children camping. So does it meet the expectations? And unfortunately, not all of our members are here, but what if we were to add an additional component or separate RV parks? I mean, are we only referencing campgrounds, or are we referencing RV parks? And for that, like for myself, I think that's an important distinction.
Sure.
And
well,
that's why I would hope that we could have a buffet with more options to choose from rather than less. Looking for a win-win versus and or.
So the reason they're together is because in NAICS, which is typically where we derive uses from, they're lumped as a single type of use. When you go to, the campground, you typically have RV spots and campsites, right? Tent sites and RV sites. So that's the typical use. If the concern is full-time residency and the density, then I think we can adjust the standards to say, okay, instead of, 5 per acre, we go to 2 per acre or 3 per acre or something along those lines, right? You modify the density allowed, or you add a standard for duration. My only caution on duration saying, no more than 90 days or something along those lines, it's really hard to enforce. Because then the neighbors call, like I saw this blue RV there for the last 93 days, you guys need to come tell them to move. It's like, how do you enforce that? How do you actually verify? So we could implement something, just know it would take a lot of effort. So and the enforceability behind that, our enforcement right now, there's not you could go through and potentially revoke the CUP if enough violations are recorded on it. So either way, I was just asking, is that the intent? Is the intent just to remove it together? The commission doesn't want to see any RV parks or campgrounds in the rural and ag forest?
Now this is gonna require a hearing.
Yeah.
So
speaking for myself,
yep.
I would like to have as many options as possible that we can present to the board and to the public. I understand that there's appetite on all sides as many contentious items within county government at this time. So having more options, and then we'll see which way the public testifies, and then which way the board goes.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. From what I understand from the motion last week, it was they directed staff to come up with, or to draft up the changes as proposed. So that's what I've done. And just seeking, is this what you guys want, or do you want a workshop that says, okay, let's dive through the standards, so give you guys more time to review it?
Let's look at what we got. Let's look at what you got drafted, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
I want more options.
Yeah, more
I want as many options as possible so that the public and the commissioners can see what is out there, and then we'll make a determination, figure out what will best serve our county.
Okay. So what, you'd like me to set up a workshop, give you guys more options and some potential, I guess I guess the big question is what's the intent, or what's the end result that's wanted? Is it, you wanna hear concerns, additional concerns from the public on it, or, do you want me to draft up some additional options?
I would like more options for myself. And then, I mean, part of the challenge is, there's additional challenges, but for myself, I would like to hear more options before we go into the hearing.
Okay, we'll work.
I have faith in you.
Okay, I'll review it again. I guess what do you guys want to, what's the?
Timelines?
Mhm.
So you're talking about, let's say
Timeline.
let's forget about enforcement in regards to the practicality, because there are some things that are just not practical.
Sure.
There are people who have illegal campgrounds, illegal stuff with zoning across, and we deal with compliance issues in North Idaho. We just had a meeting about the forest plan, and we had some questions that were absolutely legitimate. How in a 1 million acre area are we gonna make sure that everybody's following the rules? There are challenges with living in rural Idaho, and that's reality. So as we're trying to craft ordinance or make changes to ordinance, let's do the best we can, and let's assume the best that people are gonna do the right thing. So whether it's 30 days, I don't know.
Okay.
So timeline.
So I guess my concern is you look at the trickle down effect that maybe you don't want to happen. So we had a really awesome CUP last year from Cocolala Bible Camp, right? It was a legal non-conforming property. They wanted to come in and just build a single bunkhouse. Through conversations with staff, we're like, well, what's your 5-year plan? What's your 10-year plan? What do you actually want to accomplish as a master plan? They went back, they met together, and they said, oh, we want all these things. So they crafted up a big CUP and an overarching change looking at the actual long-term effects and the long-term goals of that Bible camp, right? And then we crafted the CUP and we helped them with that. They came up with phased approaches, and that all went through 1 hearing rather than probably 6 hearings in the next 3 years every time they wanted to construct a building, right? The reason I bring this up is so a portion of that was solidifying or establishing an RV park for part of their staffing for the summertime, right? And this is in, I think, Rule 5, if I remember right, that type of event couldn't happen if we remove it from the rule zone, right? And that is clearly an accessory use to like a campground, right? This Bible camp that's, housed throughout the summer. So that's one of those like unintended consequences that might happen if we just remove it outright. You'll have a number of these summer camps that now all of a sudden they can't bring in RVs, and their staffers have to either build cabins or put up tents to sleep. So there's a lot of auxiliary uses to this that once you get past 2, you get to that 3rd RV, it requires the conditional use permit, so you'd be limiting or taking away the ability of that. So that's why I'm asking, what's the intent? Is the intent
That's the first reason for a CUP. To look at an individual, unique situation, every piece of property is unique, because it's the only one on planet Earth that's sitting in that spot.
Sure.
It's unique. And so things that apply to it, especially in our terrain, can change drastically 10 feet the other side of that fence. It can be straight up. And so that's why you have a conditional use permit, so you can look at it and say, yes, this is a workable thing, this is something that actually makes sense, this is the reason we have a CUP, or no, it doesn't really fit, and so you deny the CUP or you approve the CUP. That's why you have the CUP.
Sure.
And I don't think by restricting
well,
it even more, you would come into that scenario where you have the unintended consequences. Now you've got something that actually absolutely 100% makes sense for that Bible camp. Would not happen.
right.
So whose rights have been violated? And for what reason have they been violated?
So what we talked about last month, Commissioner, I don't think you were here, we went through some training, and when it's a conditional use, it's conditionally permitted. It's not a
Right,
approve
it's a
deny.
condition.
It's what conditions should apply to this property specific, given the conditions on the property, right? So
In this
maybe you
situation.
add hours of operation or whatnot, but it's not really you deny it, because it's already conditionally approved. So it's not an approved deny. If they came in asking for a machine shop and it's, there's no use for that there, then you deny it, right? It's not in the use table, but given that this is a conditional use in the use table, it's conditionally approved, so what conditions should be applied on the approval of this, right? If that makes sense. So that's what I go back to, like, what's the intent? I'd like kind of some guidance on what's the end result you guys wanna see, and otherwise I can just come up with a number of scenarios, but just given what I heard last week was let's strike the conditional use out of ag forest and add a rural residential. I just wanted to talk through potentially some unintended consequences of that decision.
Yeah, they could
We
only
can-
happen in the city. If you took
It
out
would
the
happen in
rural and
the
suburban.
suburban zones, but,
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't mess with the densities and the potential impact of the neighbors is the exact same in suburban zones that would be in the R5 or R10 or ag forest, right? So, from what I heard from the presentation is, it's a nuisance to the neighbors and whatnot, but unless you mess with some of the standards, the nuisance is gonna be the same in the zones it's already conditionally permitted in. Does that make sense? That's what goes back to, what's the intent behind this change, and maybe there's a different way that we should skin the cat type thing, right? Or do we just roll forward as you guys talked through last week and we can get planning's recommendation on it, so.
I'm gonna intervene there. I just feel like we're treading some dangerous waters with that, considering it is gonna be an upcoming decision and it will most likely be at a hearing. So I'm gonna cut that off. There was a motion on the table at the business meeting, and I think everybody should just go with the motion that was on the table at the business meeting. I feel like we're kind of treading dangerous territory here with these two.
I think what I remember the emotion was to have staff draft up the change. So that's what I've done. Do you want me to apply for it, or do you want a workshop before we go to planning commission? Or do you want me to send this as a file to planning commission?
I would like a workshop.
That's it. I'll set up a workshop for this. So, I'll draft up some stuff, send it over to you guys, and then, I would just ask you to review the standards, because there's a lot in there that might be beneficial to adjust rather than adjusting the conditional use, so. That's
So
my-
the motion on it was to make a motion to direct planning staff to initiate the process on this item and present to the planning commission. So
Oh, okay,
that was the motion.
okay, sounds good, I will do that.
It'd be you guys.
So what I'll do then is, I'll draft it up, I'll create the file, and I'll have the planning commission give you a recommendation. If you don't wanna take it up right away, then we'll do a workshop before you guys have similar to our comp plan update process, right? We're doing a workshop, so we can do it that way.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on. Comp plan update, so, with the housing component, as a draft, and then economic development and public airports facilities. So on the docket for next week is the housing component
Priest
again.
River,
I know there's a lot of data mining going into that. Swati spent
they skipped over it.
numerous hours. I think she sat down with one of the commissioners yesterday for 2.5 hours working on data for the housing component. So just know there's a lot of data going into these different components, and especially where we can find it, right? And then public airports facilities, there's a public hearing for it next week. And then you'll see that probably in the next month as a public hearing before the board. Or I think we'll have a workshop first, so. And this is just the status of, this is just the status of all the different AM files where they're at. That's the actual amendments and to the different components. And then the last one is just that final, where are we at? So we have 4 components left to schedule for a hearing with the planning commission. I know they're all in various sources of development. Just know they'll keep working on it. But these are some of the bigger components, the economic development. The land use will be the very last one we look at. The natural resources is gonna be a fairly big one. Yeah. And then housing, that's a pretty significant one, so that's where that goes. Any questions on comp plan update process? So the next 2 things are a couple of action items. So we painstakingly went through at the beginning of our comp plan update. So first off, this process is something I drafted up after Commissioner Williams gave me some advice saying, hey, let's put the process down. So it's not vested in code. I've referenced a lot of code in here, And I just wanted a step-by-step to give some members of the public and even the planning commission and the board some idea of, like, what does it take to update the comp plan component? So that's where this came from. I drafted up, I had Swati review it, and then I accepted all of her changes, because she's usually right. And then we move forward, so. This is already on the comp plan page. It's been on there since January 30th. It was on our docket to review last month, but we didn't get to it in our board update meeting. And then, so the two last steps, the step 5 and 6, is an assumption that I've made. And I just want some direction as to what differences or what changes does the board want when looking at comp plan components. So as I said, the planning commission, they went through and talked through each component and, like, you know, how do we first start looking at this? Okay, let's close it to public comment, come up with a draft. This is essentially what it says here in steps 1 through 4. Come up with a draft, take that draft, put it on the website, open that for public comment, accept public comment, modify anything as needed, right, based on public comment, steps to it, need more public involvement, specifically on the recommended change from the planning commission when the board gets the file.
I am content with this process at this time. That is, and I like that there's so much opportunity for public comment. There can be, we can schedule additional workshops as necessary, depending upon the volume of comments that we get,
Okay.
if necessary, or continue time and date certain.
So I could add a disclaimer in there that's saying additional workshops or continuation of files, you know, may be required, you know, based on public comment or participation or something along those lines. I'm just trying to give a clear picture for the public if they want to participate, like what they can expect, right? So I'm trying to put it in layman's terms and try not to be too much of a planner lingo on this, to make it, you know, easily understood by members of the public. So.
As if you were a planner.
I believe in your process.
Okay.
You guys and those guys have me sold, okay? I have total faith in y'all. And I have no problem saying no when it's time to say no.
So do we want the workshops with the board to be open for public comment, or do you want to keep that between?
The workshop will
board and
be a
the planning-
workshop.
Between the board and the planning commission?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that way it actually gets done.
Okay. So I would then, since we have members of the public here, I'd really encourage you guys to attend and participate during planning commission meetings. So we had nobody, I don't think anybody in attendance last week, right? So when we had workshops, part of that was open to public comment, so please participate. It's, you know, when it gets to the board, it really should be a pretty final draft, that would need just some minor tweaks by the board, before adoption, so please participate. It's up to the chair, public comment.
I have a question.
No, this is the update thing.
Well, it was on the update.
Okay.
Is it advertised as public?
We don't have any public comment, period for these
I didn't
workshop
think- yeah, I
updates,
didn't
so
think
it's,
so.
it's
No,
up to
just
the
you-
chair.
You skipped over something.
In regards to, so we've got the process here on page 1. On page 2, I have,
Oh, I did, okay, I skipped past
East River.
East River DM's
Yeah.
properties. I'll get back to it, thank you.
Okay,
Yeah, I
Thank
should
you.
have followed the agenda.
that's all it was.
Yep, very good.
fair enough. In regards to the notes, I've had some significant conversations with staff in regards to cadence review and public comments. Are we still, because we're looking at, I'm looking on page, in the Bonner County update process, I'm looking at page 2 of 3 and then 3 of 3. And I've been in conversations with staff about having greater adherence to code, but then also taking into account the tradition of having additional public comment. Or is it, when will that be addressed?
So,
Our agency list is not necessarily reflective of state code.
So if you want additional agencies, I would say, let us know now, we'll add it to the list here, and moving forward, we'll make sure those get notified.
Well, part of my conversation was though, is that we have some agencies on here that do not meet the requirements. So we can do we adjust the lists as we adjust our process? So we're trying to improve transparency, but also adherence to law and code. And so if we are doing things that are not in adherence with code, I have struggles with that. And I would like us to be, we can still invite everybody to comment, but in regards to updating our lists, who comments has created some challenges in regards to the way that we operate as a board and a commission. And I've spoken with Swati and Travis, and some others about being as accurate and reflective of the law as it exists, not as we want it to be. So, could we get more on that in your next month update, please? I mean, that way you weren't on the spot right now.
That'd be fine. If you want me to review the agency list we have, if I understand
Well,
correctly, and then.
If you talk with Swati and Travis, or I can do it over the month, so we can see them present in that update. Some ideas about that, which also goes in line with the form that I'm hoping and some of those other transparency pieces. So
Updating on public comments and how to accept public comments.
Yes.
I'm for doing like a Google form to help like streamline public comments, and it would actually cut down on some administrative side and give a little bit more uniformity to it. So I think that's a change we can implement pretty quickly. We're testing that out internal on like what do those back-end reports look like and how can we upload those, and yeah. So if the board wants us to start putting public comments on the website, just let me know. It hasn't been tradition in the department. I think Luke and I have talked about it a little bit, and I'm fine making that change. Yeah, moving forward. And then the only thing I'm concerned about, Commissioner, is that if there are specific, like the comp plan is living and breathing, right? It's continually being updated. So if there are some specific agencies you want us to start routing in between now and next month, let us know and we can add it to the list, and then we can have that discussion again after we revisit this. But, Swati, do you have anything you wanted to add on how we came up with this list? No.
We just started adding things, a lot of agencies just, yeah. For several land use files, we were notifying some of these agencies because they were in that area all around, but it's not required, that is not what the state code wants. And that is how we put that list together by combining all those agency routings and finding the agencies that were notified even on one land use file over years. So it doesn't necessarily constitute the right list at the moment.
And one of the concerns of the public and part of the board on different occasions has been, well, you shouldn't move forward because Fish and Game didn't respond. You shouldn't move forward because the Corps of Engineers didn't respond even though they were notified, or DEQ or IDL or whoever. It's our responsibility to notify them. We can't make them respond.
Correct. And I agree, I'm just
I
curious.
mean, we just don't have that authority to say, George, you must respond.
Sure.
We can't do that.
If we have some
I mean,
specific.
we don't have a right to do that. All we can do
I'm
is
just looking at-
notify your agency that this is happening, this is a file that's coming through, do you have concerns? We can't make you comment. We just can't do it.
If there are, so the way that our land use code is drafted is, it gives a lot of, in chapter 2, sorry, I'm dragging, jet lag still after 4 days. So we're fine with, from what I understand, we're fine with the process as presented, with the exception of, let's look over the agency routing and potentially add some additional agencies to that. Okay. Thank you. Hey,
Back to Priest River.
back to Priest River de-annex properties, so thank you for catching that. Not a whole lot of updates, so, Daniel's working the file, it's a legislative change, so it's gonna go to planning commission for, I believe that's set for April 20th? You guys remember?
April 4th.
April 4th, thank you. So that it'll go to planning commission April 4th, it'll be scheduled with the board by beginning of May, so that meets right in timeline with the moratorium we have on there, which I think expires June-ish, if I remember right. So we'll get it all done in May, and then we'll lift the moratorium at the same time as approving the zoning and the comp plan. So, we're gonna incorporate some additional properties, only because then we'd have some islands of, resort community. And I think it was the intent from our workshop, the direction I got was all the resort community gets turned into rural. There's a portion of transition that would be R5, so we're gonna include that as a change to rural as well to match the zoning, and then we'll establish R5 zoning on all of it. There's one other tiny piece, I think it's like a 0.3 acre, that we didn't notice. We're gonna verify that it's not a mapping error, or if it was part of Priest River that got DNX, we'll include that as well. So we just found that today. Daniel's gonna call Priest River and see if that was a portion of the DNX, or if it's just a GIS mapping error on their side.
So then property owners, and there will be a hearing still.
There'll be 2 hearings.
Very good.
Absolutely.
So there will be opportunities
Absolutely.
for the public and the landowners at large to be able to participate in the process.
Correct.
Great.
So that's all the updates. So we'll have our first hearing before the next board update meeting in a month, and then, or it'll be right after our next board.
Good. Thank you.
That's it. Make sure I'm not missing anything else. Find ways to find people not in compliance. So right now, it's really customer driven or complaint driven when it comes to compliance. We don't actively look for violations, other than when, if you live near the road, just know my compliance guy, if you're building a barn and you haven't gotten a permit, that's when you get fought, or you get found, right? We're not actively looking. So I'm making some changes using GIS tools to look for uncompliant parcels. I'm working with Mike, that's doing with our uncompliant buildings, right? So buildings without a permit. We're finding, we're working on a process to find boundary line adjustments. This proposal is helping with vacation rental permits. So from what we understand, we're capturing about 20% of what could be a vacation rental, right? So what this company does is actively scrape all your short-term rental websites, your Airbnbs and whatnot. There's cost involved and whatnot, but
So this would help with the existing code for compliance across the county.
specifically for short-term rental permits, yeah, vacation rentals.
But those permits already exist.
So we're only capturing, only about 20% of the active
Yes.
people have a permit. So it would be getting more people on board and getting them permitted. Some of it is just lack of knowing, right? They don't know that a permit's required. So some of it's education, some of it they actively know and they said, I don't wanna go, spend any more money with the government, right? So, this would be, there's like tiers of, levels of this. This could also be used that if like a short-term rental tax, like a hotel tax would ever be implemented with the county, which we don't have one. I think we have the jurisdiction to implement one. We could bring in a lot of tax revenue and hit the actual users that are hitting the roads, right? This could be used to collect tax dollars on hotel tax or short-term rental tax, so that's anything a stay less than 30 days. So there's a tax collection portion of this. So that's where my department would be really active on getting people in compliance. So if this seems like it's a good idea, what I'd like to do is set up a workshop with Deckard, and have a proposal, have like a show with the board, right? It's not something we budgeted for, it's something we could add to next year's budget. It could increase, I'm just looking actively for, other ways to get compliance. So it could increase some revenue on the department, getting more people in compliance.
We've done that several times.
Yeah.
We did it, we do it all kinds with software companies and various other, who just wanna come in and give a presentation.
Exactly.
So that's completely.
I think we should have a workshop and listen to see what they have to propose.
Okay.
Who knows? We aren't making a decision, let's listen and see what they have to say.
Okay, sounds good.
Mr. Chairman?
No, I think it's a great idea.
The idea of like a short-term